It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Welcome to episode 13 of the Jersey Blitz. On this episode, we're going to have some reactions to some crazy sectional finals in last week's playoffs, as well as breaking down each and every one of the 14 semifinals on the horizon in both the non-public and public school ranks. So let's get right into the thick of the action and talking about some of the great sectional championship games from last week, including Union City's thrilling victory over Passaic Tech in North 2 Group 5. And to talk about that, I bring in Ryan Patty. And Ryan, what was the most surprising part of that game that Union City won over Passaic Tech?
Well, Dan, there's two things that surprised me about this game, but one thing that didn't was how good the game was. I had people tell me that Union City was going to blow them out, but I didn't believe that for a second. And, even though Passaic Tech doesn't have the manpower that Union City has, this team was explosive enough to make this a great game, and that's exactly what we saw on Friday. I mean, that was one of, if not the game of the year. I would say what surprised me most, though, was how cool and collected Union City's passing game was on the final drive. Let's put this into perspective here. I mean, like I've talked about how good this team can throw the ball, but this is a wing T team. So they just kind of, don't have the reps. I mean, it's a very small sample size this year. And, they had 49 seconds left, down 29-28, and they were moving into a strong wind. And Union City's kicker, Abdoulaye Nais, is a good kicker, but this wind was strong, and you kind of never know what would have happened if they kicked that field goal. They went right down the field. And the first play was a bomb up the right sideline to Kareem Hector. And, Passaic Tech quarterback Gabe Miles threw an interception going in this direction into the wind. The ball just got hung up there. But Rodriguez's ball, Xavier Rodriguez, just cut it right through the wind. It was a great throw. And, they hit the slant on the next play or a couple plays later to Khalil Sutton to win the game. And it was great time management from head coach Wilbur Valdez. He even found time to mix in a run play to Mark Boyd. And, the poise from Rodriguez and the offense as a whole was just superb. And it was like they had been there before when they really hadn't. And the effort from Passaic Tech was just unbelievable. Even without star Ian McDuffie, the sophomore, he got hurt in the first half. And they hit a big play to Jaden Santiago right before the half that tied the game at 14. Just an unbelievable game, unbelievable effort from both sides. And both sides should just be very, very proud of what happened.
So that was a thrilling finish in North 2 Group 5. Mike Kinney, we had an outstanding finish in North 2 Group 4 as Phillipsburg rallied late past Northern Highlands with a game-winning 46-yard field goal that sent the State Liner Nation ablaze.
Yeah, Dan, Phillipsburg was not able to generate the kind of offense they had been pretty much all season against Northern Highlands. Not completely unexpected. Northern Highlands has played fantastic football despite being down with injuries. One thing they've done is they've kept people close, including Ramapo, and they did the same thing to Phillipsburg. What surprised me is that they did it at Phillipsburg, which is always a tough place to play. The environment is usually a little overwhelming, a little intimidating for the opponent. Northern Highlands was having none of that. It was only 3-0 at the half. Now, the great sign for Peaburg was that Alex Marrera had kicked a 33-yard field goal to give them that lead. He'd only kicked one other field goal in his career for Phillipsburg. That was the week before against Chatham. So it's almost as though in that Chatham game, they trotted him out just to see. Let's see if we have this for our playoffs in case we need it. Great coaching by Frank Duffy. Marrera's done a great job on extra points, and he's had plenty of opportunity to kick those. He's 50 of 52 this year. Going down the wire, though, again, Genovese is playing well at quarterback, but they just can't really get the ball in the end zone against Northern Highlands. Last 46 seconds left, as you mentioned, Marrera kicks his career high 46-yard field goal to win the game. Unbelievable ending over at Phillipsburg. A little surprising, but hey, Peaburg goes on with that, and Alex Marrera right now is a very large component of that offense, and we didn't even know that 2 weeks ago.
Two crazy finishes in the sectional finals, but now we close the book on that and turn the page to the semifinals in all of the non-public and public school ranks. The first one that we'll look at, great matchup between two bitter rivals. St. Joseph Regional taking on Bergen Catholic. And Ryan Patty, what did Bergen Catholic learn most from that first matchup in Montvale against SJR?
Well, Dan, what I'm going to talk about, I think they've known it for a while, but it became very clear to me that day in Montvale. And, like I said, I know Vito Campanelli has long known this probably, and it's that their offensive line, specifically in the ground game, is the best unit of their team. And, we know how talented Najee Calhoun and Dante Kane are, and they certainly contribute to that ground game. And we know how good Quincy Porter is. We know Dom Campanelli can spin the ball. They're too deep on the defensive line, and Naeem Parrish and Jordan Thomas are special players in the secondary, but this offensive line is their best unit, and everything this offense does kind of revolves around them. The only game where they kind of looked human was against Don Bosco, and the stats would kind of tell you that. They ran 27 times for only 73 yards, and Bergen was actually outgained by Bosco by over 150 yards in that game. But even against, IMG, Bergen was running the ball at an impressive clip, and in that game against Joe's in the regular season, it was tight late. I think it was 14-10 when Bergen went on that drive with a couple minutes left and kind of put their stamp on the game, went up 2 possessions. It was nothing but run plays on that drive, and that's kind of the drive that Coach Campanelli likes calling a Bergen Catholic drive, quote unquote. And when this team can get running, downhill, no one's beating them. And for St. Joe's to have their chance to win in this game, I think it kind of starts with stopping the run. And right now in that department, I kind of think Bergen has a big advantage.
Luis Torres, first time that you're here on this episode, number 13 of the Jersey Blitz. Can St. Joe's make the big play when it matters the most against the Crusaders?
Yeah, going back to that first matchup between Bergen and Joe's, I was talking to Augie Hoffman afterwards, and he was telling me that the one thing that's been Joe's Achilles heel this year is that they haven't been able to make the big play when it matters most. And you look at all their losses, and they've all been pretty close to teams like DePaul, to teams like Bergen Catholic, to teams like Don Bosco. Is they've missed that critical blocking assignment when trying to execute a play on offense. They haven't been able to get off the field on the critical third down on defense. And this game on Saturday is going to come down to, can St. Joe's make the big play when it matters most? And like I alluded to, it's kind of getting off the field on third down on defense when Bergen Catholic has a 3rd and short or a 4th and short. If Najee Calhoun or Dante Kane gets the ball, can St. Joseph's defense kind of rise to the occasion on that? And can Nate Bailey or John Forster get those critical yards on 3rd down and 4th down on offense? And we still don't know the status of quarterback Lamar Best, who of course has been out with a collarbone injury since beating Pope John late in the regular season. Mason Geis played pretty well. I think that was his first start against Bergen Catholic, and you can a few weeks ago. And that's being basically thrown into the fire, making your first career start. At St. Joe's. Of course, he's a transfer from Immaculata. So if it's Geis back in there, he's going to have to play the same way he kind of did that first matchup, was not make mistakes and make the throws when necessary, and kind of have his receivers make those critical catches on 3rd down to kind of keep the chains moving. So that's going to be the biggest turning point. I mean, the biggest thing for St. Joe's kind of here on Saturday, they're going to have to go up to the Jack and kind of pull off the upset, because they've been waiting for this matchup. I think a lot of people have, since that first meeting between the two teams.
So that's one side of the bracket in non-public A. The other side is going to be in Ramsey, as Don Bosco Prep's going to be playing host to St. Augustine Prep, who pulled the upset against Del Barton, the number 3 seed, in the quarterfinals. Luis, Bosco can't afford to overlook this good St. Augustine Prep team. What do they have to do to make a statement early on?
Yeah, I think if they overlook St. Augustine here, I think there's a chance that, St. Augustine went to, and I know Bill Evans is going to touch on this, St. Augustine last week went all the way to Morristown and beat Del Barton. And one thing, there's some history here, of course, with Bosco and St. Augustine. They played 3 years ago. Bosco had to go down to St. Augustine in the semifinals. A couple of years ago, there was St. Augustine went up to Ramsey and played a game on Saturday because there's some bad weather that weekend. And I was talking to Dan Sabella earlier, the Don Bosco coach. He said that St. Augustine will want to keep this game, kind of keep the clock moving. They kind of use up every second of the play clock when getting their plays in and kind of running their stuff to running back Julian Turner, who's had a fantastic season. He had a great game last week as well. And what Don Bosco's going to want to do is they're going to want to start fast offensively. They had some struggles last week, kind of coming off that bye week on offensively. They kind of get going, and then all of a sudden they scored 4 touchdowns there in the second quarter to kind of put a running clock on St. Joseph Metuchen to kind of pull away there and kind of put their 2s in, mostly in the second half. So I expect Don Bosco to kind of come in here and try to put the pressure on St. Augustine by scoring early. Quarterback Devin Sissos had a fantastic season 18 touchdowns this year and only 4 interceptions. I think he threw 3 of his interceptions in the week 0 game on the road against Archbishop Hoban. So he's been fantastic this year. Dante DeLuca is just a bowling ball running back, as a wrestler too, just physical. So they're going to want to, so Don Bosco is going to kind of want to establish a line of scrimmage on both and win the battle in the trenches early on to put the pressure on St. Augustine and try to get them out of sorts there.
Bill Evans, St. Augustine held Del Barton to only 7 points in the first round. What do they need to do on offense, though, to score more against Don Bosco in the semifinal round?
Yeah, well, I mean, Julian Turney obviously is the key to their offense. He was the key to the win against Del Barton. He had the only touchdown, ran for, I think it was 134 yards on 31 carries. I mean, that's when he's going, that's that's when their offense can really click. I do think they are going to have to be a little more balanced. Ryan Storter, their quarterback, threw for about 48 yards against Del Barton. They're going to need to do more than that. I think he's got a couple weapons on the outside. Maybe not huge play guys, but guys in Liam Flynn and Roman Coney that are, can, if they get the ball in space, can make a play. I think they're going to need to be able to throw for 80 to 100 yards. They're definitely going to still rely on Turney. They missed Tanzola, their kicker, did kick a 45-yarder, but he also missed a chip shot and an extra point. They're going to need every point in this one. So they're going to need to be a little more balanced. Turney is obviously still going to have a very good game, and then if they get down into that red zone, they're going to have to come away with points, whether it's 7 or 3, just about every time they get down there.
Moving now to non-public B in the semifinals, I will be in Wayne for this one. DePaul Catholic taking on Holy Spirit. And Ryan Patty, what does DePaul need to do to fend off a feisty Holy Spirit team?
Yeah, Dan, they need to hit big plays and not give up big plays in this game. And for DePaul, we all know who the stars are. Nolan James, just committed to Notre Dame. Elijah Burris has been committed to Notre Dame, and Desi Jones going to Ohio State. And all 3 of these kids are going to those schools next year for a reason. They've combined for 45 touchdowns. And junior quarterback Derek Zammit has done an excellent job of spreading the ball around. He can extend plays with his legs. He can take off and run. I mean, he's not only passing, extending plays with his legs, but he has 3 rushing touchdowns this year, a lot of rushing yards, and he's kind of becoming that prospect that a lot of colleges believe in him to be. And this offense has over 4,600 yards and 54 touchdowns in 10 games, and it's one of the more explosive offenses that I've seen in my time, in this industry covering high school football. So that's kind of the offense they need to be on Friday. And if I'm head coach Nick Campanelli, I'm looking at that week 0 tape from Holy Spirit's game against Lodzier Brooks and Millville, and I'd be asking myself how I can get Nolan, Elijah, and Desi into space in the second and third levels of the defense, because that's exactly what Lodzier Brooks was doing against Holy Spirit in that game. But that was a long time ago. I mean, Holy Spirit's won 9 in a row. They're playing a lot better since that game. They just beat St. Thomas Aquinas in an incredible game, a game we all wish was happening this weekend instead of last weekend, but we've ranted a ton about that. But Holy Spirit, they're going to need to sustain long drives. Ty Constable, has played a lot better these past couple weeks, and Jasir Ward, Amir Hicks, 2 very good running backs. So DePaul's got to crack down on defense and not lose focus, which they've done a couple times this year.
Kevin Minnick, how can Holy Spirit pull off another South Jersey upset up in North Jersey?
Dan, Ryan just whipped off a laundry list of D1 players, and Holy Spirit simply does not have that luxury. Holy Spirit has what I would classify as good high school football players. There's going to be some kids that are going to go on to college. They're not going to the big time D1 schools. They're going to, go to school, play D2, D3 football, get an education, and move on. Holy Spirit is kind of at a disadvantage in that their talent level does not come close to meeting that of DePaul. But we're also talking about high school kids. We're talking about a 1-game scenario, and Holy Spirit as a program has made the second round, this semifinal round, every year since 2016. And except for that 1 year of COVID in 2020, where they finished number 2 in the state and undefeated. So here's a program coming in that has a lot of pride, has a lot of winning tradition. It's a matter of getting over that hump, and they've always had to face pretty much a team a little bit more superior than them. they're going to have to play, in essence, a perfect game, and they're going to have to catch some breaks. DePaul's going to have to make some mental mistakes, maybe, and maybe hurt itself a little bit. I give Holy Spirit, a fighter's chance to compete, to stay in the game and show that they're worthy of being there. And obviously everything is pointing against them, but if they can, make some stops, they can chew up some clock by running the football and moving the chains. And if they can stay close in that fourth quarter, anything can happen. So, while DePaul is clearly the favorite and the team to move on, Holy Spirit is not going to be scared one bit going up there that night. And, I bet they're going to give everything they have.
Yeah, and that's going to be a fun one for myself and others to call. So it's going to be one of our NJ.com games of the week. Holy Spirit at DePaul, 6 p.m. on Friday. You can watch it live and on demand on NJ.com/watch. The other semifinal, non-public B, well, this side of the bracket was just absolutely blown up. Pope John advancing to take on St. John Vianney. Again, this is the same Pope John team that we covered in the first round of the playoffs. 2-7. We're hosting Campton Catholic. And Joe Zidala's first time that we welcome you onto the podcast this week. St. John Vianney, they pulled the upset against Red Bank Catholic. Do they have what it takes to possibly make an improbable run to MetLife?
Well, it's a great question, Dan. I mean, they can't match the schedule that Pope John has played. I mean, just run down Pope John's schedule. Del Barton, DePaul, Bergen Catholic, St. Peter's Prep. Vianney has played nobody like that whatsoever. But I can tell you this, St. John Vianney is going to go up there and they're going to play like they have nothing to lose, because they don't. The one thing Vianney has been able to do all season is keep games close, so they had a chance to win in the fourth quarter against good opponents. Vianney they've played 4 games that were decided by 10 points or less. They're 2-2 in those games. They lost the first 2, but they've won the last 2. And there's a football adage out there that says you got to lose games before you learn how to win them. And I think that's where we are at Vianney. Now, Vianney has tons of issues on defense, but Bobby Acosta, who's been a major college offensive coordinator, play caller at Syracuse, play caller at Arkansas, Pine Bluff, among other places, he has kind of altered his game plan a little bit in the last month or so. In his first 8 games, St. John Vianney averaged 24 rushing attempts per game. In their last 4 games, they've averaged 35 rushes a game. What that means for Vianney is they're putting the ball in the belly of Abdul Toure, the state's leading rusher, leads the state in touchdowns. So in essence, now they're giving the ball to their best player more often. And Toure, folks, is as good as anybody in New Jersey. He's just a sophomore. He makes himself small. He's a jump cut specialist. So they're going to give him the football a lot. And as the result of that, Vianney has been able to keep its defense off the field, which is a big deal when you're giving up a lot of points per game. And it's made their passing game better. Zach LaBarca, in his first 8 games, had 8 touchdowns. In his last 4 games, he has 7. And in his last 4 games, he's averaging 16.3 yards per completion. Now, moving the change is going to be a big deal for Vianney. They can't get behind the sticks. Now, I don't know if they can stay with Pope John for 4 quarters. I mean, that's a football team that all of a sudden is playing, with confidence and light on its feet. But if it's close in the fourth quarter, don't count St. John Vianney out of this game.
Luis Torres, we've seen Pope John several times this year, and they have some of the most explosive playmakers on offense. The question has always been, what can the Lions do defensively to slow down other teams, as they were giving up an average of over 40 points per game to opponents before the start of the playoffs? What can their defense do to rise to the occasion in the semifinal?
Yeah, Joe touched on the prolific offense that St. John Vianney has, especially, you have 2 really good running backs here, and Pope John's Tyreek Hill is as dynamic as they come and can score from anywhere on the field. And Joe touched on Abdul Toure, kind of the season he's having. I mean, 36 touchdowns and 2,200 rushing yards is pretty incredible. And I'm curious to see kind of how Dom Gaston approaches this game. Kind of defensively, does he decide to stack the box with 6 or 7 guys? I know they run their 3-4 defense. They have really good linebackers, like Tyler Hauser is committed to Wake Forest, who's come back from injury and has been fantastic last week. I think he had 20 tackles against Paramus Catholic. Paramus Catholic kind of did the same thing where they held the ball, kind of running behind their offensive line, and Pope John's defense was able to kind of rise to the occasion then. And they're gonna have to do it again on Saturday for a chance to clinch a spot in the non-public B final. Wes Johnson's another linebacker for Pope John, who's having a really good year. He's been a 3-year starter, I think, or a 4-year starter there for Gaston and Pope John, and he's been incredible. And he's typically lines up at outside linebacker, and then Hauser's in the middle. So those guys are gonna have to play really well. And the secondary is going to have to play on their toes as well. You expect to see a little bit of Tyleek Hill play some safety, play some corner. He does get some burn on defense, and I expect him to play a lot defensively as well on Saturday against St. John Vianney's offense. So I think Pope John's only allowed 17 points through 2 games in the state tournament, 7 against Camden Catholic and 10 last week to Paramus Catholic. And that's one of the reasons why they're in this position, one game away from clinching a spot in the non-public B final.
So that's a breakdown of the 2 non-public groups in A and B and all those semifinals. Now we shift gears to the public school ranks, looking first at Group 5 in a semifinal. Union City taking on East Orange. Ryan, Patty, what are some of the things that Union City needs to button up ahead of this game?
Yeah, Dan. So that was an amazing win over Passaic Tech, like I said, but they kind of got knocked off their script a little bit in that game. And I think one thing they have to worry about, or at least, focus on in practice this week is tackling. They didn't tackle all that well in that game on Friday. And, East Orange has a lot of big playability, and, it could bite them again this week if they don't tackle a little better. And this is a defense that's known for how hard it can hit. I mean, and how hard it can, how well it could tackle. I mean, there were some booming hits in that game against Passaic Tech, some of the hardest hits I've seen all season. But the play, before halftime to Santiago was very uncharacteristic. I mean, he broke like 4 or 5 tackles on his way to the end zone. And they gave up 29 points. So that was also a little unusual to see. But those 4 touchdowns, they were kind of all, on lengthy drives for Passaic Tech. And, 3 of them you could kind of point at tackling as the issue. So that's one thing they have to clean up. But they just have to get back to their brand of football, and that's physicality and lots of hats to the ball. And, that's kind of what that script is for them, just physicality, executing that wing T offense, and just 48 minutes of hell. And that's how I think they can get, back on track in terms of the brand they want to play and win the game and get to Rutgers.
Mike Kinney, is East Orange defense up for the task of stopping what Ryan was just talking about, that Union City wing T offense? And how important is Saeed Cole offensively for the Jaguars?
Yeah, Dan. First of all, addressing East Orange's defense, it had better be ready, and it had better be playing an A+ game if it wants to beat Union City. There's no doubt about that. The thing about East Orange, and they've been doing a very good job of this, but they've not seen Union City. Union City's line is physical and big and tough, and East Orange has got to be present and accounted for at the point of attack. Defensively, and that means up front, Wazine King, Alvin Collins, the 2 defensive tackles, and off the edge, Darrell James Jr., Ernst June have to be tip top at their best. They played great against West Orange, and they played great against Ridgewood. So I think the trend here is that they're playing tough, they're playing quick, they're playing smart, and they've got to up that another couple of degrees for that. Yes, and as far as Saeed Cole, he's playing brilliantly. He's doing a great job of making his reads, running when he needs to or when he wants to, when he sees openings in the RPOs, and he's doing a really good job also of making the right passes to guys. Alex Hanks, injured earlier in the season. We know how good a receiver he is. He's showing how good a receiver he is the last couple of games now that he's fully healthy. And Shakur Taylor, usually on the other side, when Cole's throwing, is another tough receiver that you've got to you've got to take account in. So Union City's got to be ready for those receivers. There's no question about it. Another key is Tyshawn Sewell running the ball. East Orange has got to establish the running game a little bit to really open things up for Cole, but that's going going to be tough against Union City. They're so physical. They're so big. So, yeah, East Orange is going to have to rely on that defensive line and maybe Union City making a mistake or two that East Orange can capitalize on.
In the other Group 5 semifinal, it's Washington Township taking on Toms River North. And Joe Dallas, we were together last week to watch Toms River North rally from a 20-7 deficit in the second half to eventually pull away for the win against Rancocas Valley. What did you see from that game where it kind of was Toms River North bucking the trends that worked for them throughout the course of the season, and it worked perfection for another Mariner win?
When Rancocas Valley went up 20-7 in the third quarter, you and me looked at one another and said, this game's over. So, I have no idea which Toms River North is going to show up. I have no idea what the coaching staff is going to do. And I mean, just take last week, for example. The scouting report was that everybody could run on Rancocas Valley. So Toms River North was hell-bent to run the ball in the middle of the Rancocas Valley defense. Well, in the first half, it really didn't work. They got stuffed twice at the goal line. And the other interesting thing was Toms River North has a 2,000-yard passer, a kid who completes 73% of his passes, and they threw the ball twice in the first half. And you remember, Dan, they didn't even start throwing the ball until there was about 5 minutes left in the second quarter. But then they come out in the third period, they go score a touchdown that makes it 20-14, and it's like they threw a switch. Now, they did another thing with TJ Valerio, the quarterback in that game. He's their leading rusher. They took him out of the game. They put a sophomore in named Cole Garrison, who you might want to get to know that name because apparently he's going to be the quarterback next year. So this kid, who had 32 carries for 276 yards coming in, goes off, running out of the Wildcat. He kept the ball between the tackles, which is what Dave Oyserwitz wanted, instead of going outside the tackles. The kid puts up 124 yards on 10 carries, scores 3 touchdowns, including a 62-yarder. So I think what you and I saw and what I believe now is everything and everybody is on the table for Toms River North. And they may have one idea going in, but they're not afraid to go in at halftime and tinker. And that defense, while it was not spectacular in the first half, it sure as heck was in the second when it intercepted 3 passes and returned 3 for touchdowns. 1 was called back consecutively. So when they start putting pressure on you from the edge, they're 2 edge guys. Blaze Boland and Eddie Slosky combined for 21 tackles and 5 sacks and 9 or 10 tackles for loss, and they can get that quarterback moving his feet. That secondary is athletic and as fast as it comes. So, last year Toms River North blasted Washington Township 48-14. Could Washington Township win the game this week? Yeah. Could Toms River North blow them out again? Yeah. It's like I said in my preview, which comes out on Thursday. I said, bring popcorn because it's never boring with Toms River North.
That is certainly the case. And Bill Evans, Washington Township, they've been on fire in the postseason. They finally got over the hump by winning a huge playoff game last week. What does that mean for them going forward in this matchup against Toms River North?
Well, I don't want to. I want to say they have nothing to lose because they have a state semifinal to lose. But look, they hadn't won a sectional title since 1995, and there'd been a lot of heartbreak in that time period. The finals that they'd been to and lost, playoff games that they were supposed to win that they didn't. So for them to just kind of get over that hump, win that title, I think does take a lot of the pressure off them. Not that it seems like they've been playing with a lot of pressure. I mean, they're peaking at the right time. They had a little 4-game stretch in the middle of the year where they went 2-2, losses to Millville and Rancocas Valley. The wins were over Williamstown and Lenape, who were struggling teams this year, and then they weren't very impressive. They kind of struggled to win those games. But, they're on a 5-game winning streak. In the last 4 games, they've given up 13 points. Their defense has scored 2 touchdowns in that period, so the defense has scored 14 and only given up 13 in the last 4 games. They won their 3 playoff games 38-0, 35-7, 27-6. just a team that's playing real well right now. Obviously, very strong on defense, but based on how many points they've allowed, and offensively, just very balanced. Jalen Robinson is one of their arguably their best defensive player, standout linebacker. Has not done much on offense this year, but in the last two games, he's carried the ball 11 times and he's scored 4 touchdowns, and a few of them on long runs. Colakino, again, has not had to throw the ball a ton, but when he does, he's completing passes at a 74% rate, and has just really kind of kept that ball moving. So I think that the way that they're playing right now, they certainly have a chance to beat anybody, as long as they can kind of keep it up at the level that we've seen from them the last 3 to 4 weeks.
Looking now at the Group 4 semifinals, first one that's on the horizon for us, Phillipsburg versus Ramapo. Ryan, Patty, what does Ramapo need to do to extend their win streak to now 9 straight and make it back to Rutgers after beginning the season 0-3?
Dan, their offense needs to keep playing like it has, and in these 8 straight wins, it's come behind great quarterback play from Casey Grusser. The junior has, in 5 of those 8 games, he's gone over the 200-yard mark. He has a touchdown to interception ratio of 13-3. He has 5 rushing touchdowns in those games, and he's gone over the 50-yard mark rushing in 4 of those games. So he's playing, just superb football right now. And, we talked last week about Dylan Rosano and how much of an impact he's made in the backfield for them now that he's healthy and he's able to carry a full workload. And he had his best game of the year last week with 24 carries for 84 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then that's, factoring in junior Liam Hayward. He had 25 carries for 123 yards and a touchdown. And he's kind of, the guy who's carried the load for them for, the most part of the year. But this offense, is very high powered right now, and it kind of needs to be in their top form on Friday. And the reason it needs to be in the top form is because the run defense for them has, been at a disadvantage almost every week. Phillipsburg, as a team, has 2,455 yards and 32 touchdowns. And on the season, excluding the loss to Summers, Ramapo has allowed 20 touchdowns and over 2,000 yards rushing on the season. So Phillipsburg has a lot of size. I think, along the offensive line, they're going to be a lot to handle for Ramapo. So I think the offense has to be really good for Ramapo. You got to make every possession count. You got to take care of the ball. You got to execute. And, they're going to be at a disadvantage in the run game, in my opinion. So the offense has to be at the top of its game once again.
Mike Kinney, this was the closest win for Phillipsburg since they defeated West Orange 21-14. Did Northern Highlands somewhat expose something that Ramapo can now exploit against the State Liners? Or was this just the tough test that the Liners needed to eventually get them to the state finals?
Yeah, great point, Dan. Yeah, I think maybe they did exploit the fact that Phillipsburg doesn't run the ball great. They run the ball pretty well, but not great. So much of Phillipsburg's offense is predicated on the passing of Jet Genovese and his excellent receivers. Matt Skirbo Jr. is, again, I've said it many times here, among the best in the state. There's no question about it, and that's a dynamic combination. Those two, they need to run the ball against Ramapo. They need to possess the clock. They need to keep the ball out of Charlie Grusser's hands and out of that explosive offense of Ramapo. The great sign here is there's 2 great signs here. One, when they had that close game against West Orange, Phillipsburg spent the next 5 or 6 games playing great offensively, defensively, and especially offensively. Offensively, they balanced things out really nice, and they ran away from teams in the first half. They need to do a little bit of that against Ramapo to take some of the pressure off themselves. Problem there is that Charlie Grusser is built to come back in those games, so Peaburg has got to be on its mess if they get that lead in the first half. But the second really good sign from the Northern Highlands game was that even though the offense struggled a little bit, first, Alex Morera showed he's a really good field goal kicker, and he can be of use here in this game. But secondly is the fact that the defense that has been playing so well played great, kept them in the game, gave Alex Morera a chance to be a hero by playing great defense, and they can do that. And the key here is the pressure that Aiden Highwell, Khalil Lewis, and Jaleel Dooley give from the front line. They've got to fill the gaps. They got to put some pressure on Charlie Grusser force some mistakes if they can. Let those linebackers make the tackles, and that's Charlie Mena and Jaden Lucas and Genovese, actually, who is outstanding linebacker. He's as good a linebacker as he is a quarterback. So, yeah, Peterboroug's got to be there with their defense. And I really believe if they play the same kind of defense they did against Northern Highlands, then it's going to give Ramapo trouble, and it's going to give Genovese plenty of confidence to get that offense going. I like the fact that Peterborough had to fight its way out of that game. I think it's going to help them for this one.
Bill Evans, when we take a look at the other Group 4 semifinal, it's the matchup that you and Kevin were talking about was probably going to be materializing all throughout the course of the season. It's Millville, it's Winslow. This is what we all expected. Can Winslow win again, or do you think Millville has an ability to counter with something completely different after watching the two in person yourself earlier this regular season?
Well, like you said, we said at the beginning of the season these teams were going to play twice. Once in the regular season and once in the postseason. Didn't seem like there was going to be a team out there that could stop that rematch from happening, and that turned out to be the case. You go back to that game in September, and it was absolutely shocking. Winslow ended up winning that game 35-7, and the 7 points Millville scored was almost a little bit fluky. Winslow was driving at the end of the half and fumbled, and Millville returned it all the way inside the 10-yard line and ended up scoring. That's the only reason they didn't get shut out in that game. And you think about how well Millville was playing going into that game. They had dominating wins over Holy Spirit, Atlantic City, Mainland, Washington Township. All three of those four teams are playing this weekend. The only one that's not is Atlantic City, who just lost to Washington Township in the sectional final, and they still got blown out. Millville's playing again just as well as they were back then. They're averaging 50 points in their 3 playoff wins. I think what they've done recently that might help them in this game. They've run the ball really well. Jamal Wallace has really taken off toward the end of the year. I do think they're going to have to be able to run the ball and control that clock. Obviously you want to keep that explosive Winslow offense off the field. Their big time receiver, arguably the best player in the state, Latsier Brooks, did not play in the final because of what Bert Ayala said was an illness. So, if he's less than 100%, then that's certainly going to, affect this game because he's going to have to be on his game. But I really think Millville's going to need to run the ball. And, obviously Brooks is going to have to make a couple plays because this Winslow team is playing as well as anybody in the state right now. They have, in my mind, is the best quarterback in the state in Jalen Parker, who has all kinds of weapons on the outside. He has 40 touchdown passes now that he reached in the sectional final against Shawnee, and could be approached the state record of 48 by Devin Leary, former Timber Creek quarterback who's now with the Baltimore Ravens. So, Winslow now, unlike the last time, is now coming into this game as the heavy favorite. But Millville certainly has some changes that they can make, adjustments that they can make to make this a little closer and give themselves a chance. But Winslow is definitely coming in here as the team to beat.
Ryan, Patty, much like we were just talking about with that Group 4 semifinal is a rematch from the regular season, the same can be said for the Group 3 semifinal between Passaic Valley and Old Tappan. Do you believe that Old Tappan is playing at the level of football that can help them flip the script from what that result was when they lost in the regular season to Passaic Valley?
Yeah, Dan, I think they're playing at a very high level. And, I think what helped was that they learned a lot about themselves. That lost to Passaic Valley a few weeks ago. And, not many coaches are as good at making adjustments and, kind of learning from losses as good as Brian Dunn has done over the course of his career. And there are a few schools that kind of have the coaching staff and, the support staff that Brian Dunn has. And, even before they had Devin and Jordan Fuller, and as far back as, to when Coach Dunn first took the job, this program's always been good at fixing its mistakes. And I think you saw the first example of that, or the best example of that, against West Essex last week. There was, the game, in the first game of the season in week 0, Old Tappan won 19-7 and scored all those points in the first quarter and kind of just held on the rest of the way. But last week, they pulled away and won 41-13. And with the exception of, 2 long touchdown runs, they kind of bottled up, everything West Essex did offensively. West Essex had 194 yards of offense in the game. and they almost had 100 more yards in that week 0 game. So I'm confident that Oltapan learned a lot from that matchup against Passaic Valley. They didn't really defend Adam Shaw, quarterback Adam Shaw, or running back Kevin Regula well at all in their RPO offense. So I think they're going to have the X's and O's to get it done this time. I think Coach Dunn's going to be prepared. I think that defense will be prepared. And I think last week kind of told you how good of a place Oltapan is in right now.
But Ryan, do you also think that Passaic Valley has what it needs to replicate what it did at the end of the regular season while winning that game against Oltapan? Can they get it done here and advance to the state final in Group 3?
I do. And this is a really good Passaic Valley team. It's one of the best teams in the history of the program. And they're obviously in a very good place, too. They beat Riverdale 38-0 last week in the sectional final. And, their formula, I think, has got to start up front. The formula to win has to be on the offensive line. And Oltapan's run defense showed last week that it's kind of ready to play ball. I mean, these kids are hungry for another crack at Passaic Valley, and Passaic Valley's got to find a way to win its blocking assignments and execute what it wants to execute on offense. And, obviously Passaic Valley's defensive ability is important in this game too. But to me, this matchup kind of comes down to Passaic Valley's offense against Oltapan's defense. And with the exception of the Northern Highlands game where Passaic Valley lost 31-6, they haven't really gotten beaten up front. So I'm interested to see what happens if Oltapan starts winning those matchups up front. Does, Shaw start taking shots downfield? Do they open it up for Shaw to, get a little more aggressive with his arm? Could they get more gadgety on offense and do some things with Kai Smith there in the slot? He's a very good athlete for them. And, if those questions are not being asked, I think that means Passaic Valley is doing its job in the RPO. And, Shaw's running the ball well and Regula's running the ball well. And they're doing their job. And, this Passaic Valley offense can absolutely replicate what it did a few weeks ago because they've done it pretty much in all but 1 week this season. It's more so, can Oltapan rise to the occasion here and flip the script? Can they prepare and get the job done this week?
The other Group 3 semifinals is a matchup between Somerville and Mainland. Mike Kinney, what can Somerville do here with their offense after an impressive win against Delsey in the sectional championship against a Mainland team that is battle-hardened and certainly has the resume as a state champion from a season ago? But that was in Group 4. What does Somerville have on the horizon here in Group 3 semi?
Yeah, Dan, if you're Somerville, if you're a Somerville fan, you've got to be pleased with the way they've played, not only through the season, but of course in the playoffs, because they've got an offense that's built for playoff success. They balance it so well with the passing of Brendan Pacheco and his excellent receivers. He's got 3 guys he can throw to who are all really good: Josh Rodriguez, Brady Shire, Max Nuzzi, but also the running, and maybe more importantly, the running of Terrell Mitchell. He's been so solid behind that offensive line. He's got well over 1,000 yards now rushing. He sets up Brendan Pacheco, whose passing is so accurate that it's almost like running the ball. I mean, they can keep moving the chains and keep the clock running with his throwing, that he's been that accurate this season, and his receivers are so sure-handed. So that balance on offense and the defense they've been playing, it's all built for playoffs. And Delsey can go back and and tell that to Mainland, because Mainland played Delsey and Mainland beat Delsey 21-14. Somerville beat Delsey just last week 24-6. Mainland also beat Ocean City 14-0, and Somerville beat Ocean City 30-14. So Mainland has to be concerned with that explosiveness that Somerville showed against 2 teams that it wasn't quite so explosive against. They probably played similarly defensively, but Mainland's going to have to ratchet up that defense, I think, if it's going to handle that balance of Somerville.
Kevin Minnick, Mainland's schedule, well, that's a big threat for them because they are battle-tested. But what's the key for Mainland to make another trip to play for a state championship to Rutgers?
Dan, like you said, Mainland has played an extremely difficult schedule. We knew what it was going to be like going into the season, and we kind of had an idea of what it would end up looking like, heading into the playoffs. And, here's a team that went 14-0 last year. Obviously, they lost a lot of players from that team, but they did bring back a handful of guys with that championship experience, and that's going to help them, in this scenario. Quarterback John Franchini doesn't have to throw the ball all that much, yet he's had a much better season this year than the previous 2 that he's been the starter. So he's done a very nice job of engineering the offense and keeping things going. but I think it's going to, I think it begins and ends with their running game. And is Somerville going to be able to slow, Rocco DiBiase? Here's a kid who, going into the playoffs, you'd look at his regular season numbers and they weren't all that great. I know he had some nagging injuries, missed some time, but, he hadn't really produced any big numbers. Playoff start, and it's a completely different ball game. 575 yards and 8 touchdowns in the 3 playoff games, including a 250-yard game and 3 scores against a Homedale team that came into that semifinal looking pretty good. So if DiBiase, gets the touches that I think he's going to have, which would probably be in the neighborhood of 25 to 30, if he gets those touches and he's able to be productive with the ball, I think Mainland has a real good shot. Obviously there is a common opponent in Delsea, and we've seen what they did, and as well as Ocean City. But like I've said before, in a 1-game scenario, high school kids, you never really know what's going to happen. And I don't know that Somerville is head and shoulders above Mainland. I don't know if Mainland's head and shoulders above Somerville, but I think Mainland's going to come into this game knowing what it needs to do to win based upon, its history in the last year and what it took to win those 14 games without a loss and to get to Rutgers and to win in the, when the spotlight's on in the most. So this is clearly going to be I don't know if this is their toughest opponent of the season, because they did have to play Millville and they did have to play Winslow. Somerville is obviously a tremendous football team, undefeated as well. But, I think, like I said, Rocco DiBiase is going to have a big hand in what happens in this game.
Looking ahead now to the semifinals in Group 2. One matchup, Hanover Park versus Shabazz. And Mike Kinney, Shabazz has been playing as good as anybody now that they're at their peak, with all their players eligible, full lineup, having the experience playing with one another and having the chemistry. What do you see from the Shabazz team that is now 1 win away from playing for a state championship?
Yeah, Dan, it's all about that chemistry, no doubt about it. Even when those guys first came back, or came back initially, I shouldn't say first came back, when Jalen Klein, the running back, and Romello Tables, the quarterback, and Shamar Myers, a linebacker, were inserted into the lineup after 3 games, it still took a little time to gel, and that's a natural thing because Shabazz had done pretty well, had won 3 games with guys who were going to have to sit the bench now. So was there animosity? I don't think there was that, but there was some getting used to this new lineup. Guys who had been starters for 3 games were now were now playing reserve roles, and guys who had been sitting and watching and practicing were now thrust into the lineup and expected to do great things. And it doesn't happen overnight, not with high school kids. So yeah, the last couple of games, we've seen that. We've seen Jalen Klein's ability to not only work between the tackles against that huge front line of his, but do that and get outside on the perimeter and make it very tough for defenses to close him off. And the minute he starts doing that, Romello Tables has the entire field ahead of him to throw the ball. Few guys in this state have the power in his right arm the way Romello Tables does. This kid can throw the ball downfield, and he's got some outstanding receivers to go get the ball for him. So it's all predicated there. Jalen Klein's ability to run the ball, Romello Tables' ability to work off Klein's running ability, and throw the ball to his receivers. Now, Tables also showed his own ability to run. I hadn't seen that in the 2 games I'd seen him before last week, and I didn't see last week's games, but against Berners, he ran the ball exceptionally well. That's a whole big problem for Hanover Park to deal with now. If he's going to run the ball also, he reaches RPOs and he's taking off when he sees some space, and then you got to worry about also Klein and those receivers getting behind the defenders. So yeah, Shabazz gelling right now, and I think really ready to take on this Hanover Park team.
Luis, what does Hanover Park have to do, first off, to adjust to the speed of Shabazz, and also just to stay in this game in order to stick around and maybe pull off the epic upset?
Yeah, I think right now Hanover Park is playing with house money. I mean, they just won their first sectional title since 1990 and just the second overall in school history. And they beat Glen Rock last week, 24-3, and an incredible season so far for Coach Dan Fulton and those guys there at Hanover Park. And like you mentioned, Shabazz has speed to burn. Hanover Park's got some speed, and they're really, really quick laterally. And they're not the biggest team. They're undersized in a lot of positions, but they make up for their speed, especially defensively. But Shabazz is just a different animal in terms of kind of the speed they have and the size they have. Like Mike alluded to, Ramel Tables is having an incredible postseason run here, and all the weapons that he has there on offense. And it's going to be a tough task for Hanover Park, and for them to have a shot, they're going to have to. It's going to come down to how quickly do they adjust to their speed. If it takes more than a half to adjust to their speed, or not adjust at all, I don't think Hanover Park has much of a shot. But if they are able to adjust relatively well within the first few minutes of the game, first quarter and a half, they have a shot at this game, because I think because they're really well coached. Fulton has done a great job with those guys. Joey Burrow, the quarterback, is kind of a dual threat as well. He's done a great job this season, kind of with the RPOs. They don't have he doesn't have a ton of huge numbers, but he just gets the job done, keeps the chains moving. They got a couple weapons there, Joey Filippo and Jack Kovacs. Both have had really good years. And the linebackers, like Hector Lopez III and Joey Filippo, who I just mentioned, they've had good years racking up the tackles. So it's going to come down to how quickly Hanover Park adjusts to their speed. And if they do, they have a shot at winning this game and moving on to the Group 2 final.
The other Group 2 semifinal, it's a matchup of two teams that know each other quite well from the Shore Conference. Point Pleasant Borough taking on Rumson Fairhaven. Joe Zadalis, what is this game plan all about if you're Point Borough trying to knock off the team that many, including you and myself, have been saying that should be the favorite in Group 2 this year in Rumson Fairhaven?
Well, Point Borough has to do is simply keep doing what it's doing, and that's play slow. What Point Borough did last week in that 15-7 win over Camden just impressed the daylights out of me, Dan, because they took an offense, one of the premier offenses in South Jersey, and they held it to 7 points. They held it under 50 yards rushing. And here are two elements of the Point Pleasant Borough team that, to me, make them special, and that is unselfishness and then discipline. From an unselfish standpoint, that offense, the quarterback is pretty much just a facilitator. So how many quarterbacks playing youth football today are sitting there thinking, wow, one day I want to be the guy who hands the ball to the dive back for the winning touchdown. So Point Borough has only thrown the ball 36 times. They only threw it 2 last week. But Jay Clayton, a sophomore, one of the best all-around athletes in the Shore Conference, knows his role. Last week, they kept handing the ball to the dive back, Dylan Rietmeyer, 33 carries. 33 carries. You want to talk about a beast of burden? That's definitely what he was. He had 152 yards and a touchdown. And then, their wingback, Nick Spinola, another sophomore, had a huge night, 6 carries, 118 yards and a touchdown. But what Point Borough did best in that game was frustrate Camden on offense and defense. Imagine knowing what was coming and being unable to stop it. That's what Camden faced on defense. And Point Pleasant Borough just, run up the middle, run up the middle, run up the middle. And that's not only fatiguing physically, it will wear you out mentally. Now, Point Borough's going to do the same thing. They want to play slow this week. Rumson's going to come out and play 100 miles an hour on offense. And we've talked about the Point Borough offense this year, Dan, that it's a double-edged sword. If you're ahead, it's a great offense because you keep the ball away. But if you're behind, it's not the greatest thing in the world. Now, when they met in week 1, Rumson won the game 41-28. Rumson bolted to a 28-7 lead, and Point Borough didn't have enough time to come back. Now, Point Borough outscored them in the second half, but they still had to be a little more slow and methodical than they needed to be. And the other thing that I really had forgotten about, Dan, about the first Point Borough Rumson game was the way Rumson Fairhaven scored. They scored on big play after big play after big play. So Point Borough never really put the brakes on them in the first half. I mean, it opened, and Owen O'Toole threw a 62-yard pass to Nick Thomas. Then later in the game, there was 2 56-yard runs by running back Kellen Murray and an 18-yard pass. And the thing was, Point Borough didn't get enough stops either. So that's going to be the interesting thing. Now you have Rumson, they're undefeated. They have an extremely balanced offense. Their quarterback, Owen O'Toole's playing lights out. He's seen the entire field. He's, completing a ton of passes. He's got great vision. And I think it's going to be a great football game. But I think for Point Borough, it's going to come down to defense. O'Toole can have free reign in the pocket. A kid who has 22,454 yards and has thrown for 35 touchdowns. Well, 26 touchdowns. You can't let him sit back there. But the same thing is, Rumson's got to get some stops. They spent the fourth quarter of that game all cramped up because Rumson plays so fast. I think it's going to be a tremendous football game. I know Rumson has getting back to the state final for a third straight year. That's been their main goal all year. They really want to give this senior class an opportunity to get that sour taste out of their mouth. So this should be a fun game, a hard-hitting game, and I know it's one I'm looking forward to.
Looking now at Group 1, one of the semifinals, Cedar Grove taking on Butler. And Ryan, what are the keys for victory for Butler in a game that in a lot of areas feels really evenly matched?
Yeah, it does feel evenly matched, Dan. And I think, the big key for Butler has to be the secondary. It has to be on its A game. And, this is a Butler defense that has a lot of kids who can defend the pass. And that's very important because this Cedar Grove passing game with Steven Paradisio is unbelievable. It's so impressive. It's been impressive since week 0. Junior Nick Parkinson for Butler has 6 interceptions. And CJ Bentley, another junior, he has 3. And, there's 2 seniors that I've been keeping an eye on all season, and PJ Coffey and Mikey Henahan, 2 kids who can make an impact on both sides of the ball. And they have 2 interceptions each. And, overall, these are 4 great athletes who have made a difference all season for Butler. And the team as a whole has 16 interceptions. And in the NJIC final I was at against Glen Rock, I got to see it firsthand with the secondary. And they don't just, intercept the ball. They knock balls down. They hit hard. They play with a physicality that, will intimidate most offenses. And, I'm interested to see if Butler is ready for the pace that Cedar Grove plays at. These guys throw the ball a lot and they snap the ball a lot. And for context on how fast they play, Butler has run 454 offensive plays this season. Cedar Grove has run 70 more plays in them. That's honestly more than a full game. So, it's a much faster tempo than what Butler saw last week against Mountain Lakes. I don't think there's more polar opposites between Mountain Lakes and Cedar Grove in terms of style. Cedar Grove is just up tempo passing, and Mountain Lakes is a wing T team that takes its time, bleeds the play clock all the way down. So Butler's got to be ready for this switch. I think they're experienced enough to make this switch, in terms of preparation, and they're certainly coached well enough. Jason Luciani is, one of the best there is. So I'm looking forward to this game, and you said it best, Dan. It's so evenly matched.
Style makes fights, Mike Kinney, and this is an offensive juggernaut in Cedar Grove that I got to see in person earlier this year in a win against Caldwell. What do they have to do to go against this Butler physical defense and try to punch their ticket back to a state championship game in Group 1?
Yeah, Dan, you want to say Cedar Grove, you look at them scoring 42 points a game, you want to say exactly what they've been doing all season. The thing is, and Ryan hit upon this, the thing is they're playing a team whose pace, Cedar Grove's pace, usually wears teams down and makes and puts defenses out of alignment. But Butler is not going to be intimidated by that. They're going to be prepared for that. They play at a pretty high pace themselves. Not quite Cedar Grove's, but they're ready for that. And that scout defense plays against that offense all the time. Butler is not seeing something that they don't know how to react to. And that's going to be Cedar Grove's job now to make that adjustment off that initial reaction and see if Steven Paradiso can do that. And I think one of the keys for Cedar Grove is, along with that passing, they've got to run the ball. It's not been a strength of Cedar Grove's by any measure in this in this season. It's all about Paradiso and getting to his unbelievably talented receivers. I mean, Jackson Maurice, you look at his numbers. Okay, let's look at Nick Russo's numbers first. Okay, Nick Russo is a senior receiver. He has 65 catches for 780 yards and 10 touchdowns. If you present that to a rival defense, that secondary is going to probably gulp and go, whoa, wow, we got to cover that kid and not let him hurt us. Well, okay. There's Jackson Maurice. Jackson Maurice has 80 receptions for 1,600 yards and 19 touchdowns. This kid has 1,600 yards worth of receiving this season, not his career, this season. And Steven Paradiso has thrown for over 3,000 yards. So, they've got to, of course, they've got to still do that, but they're going to have to do it in a little different ways, I think, against Butler, because Butler's going to be well prepared for this. There's one common opponent here, and it's Glen Ridge. And Butler beat Glen Ridge 40-20. The thing is, Butler was up 27-0 at the half against Glen Ridge. And Cedar Grove beat Glen Ridge 49-28, and it was 21-21 at the half. Cedar Grove did against Glen Ridge what they've done against almost everybody else this year, wear them down in the second half. Too tough to cover Paradiso against the speed they play at. Butler has shown against one common opponent, we're ready for you. Cedar Grove's got to play an A game.
The other Group 1 semifinal is a rematch between two division rivals, Glassboro taking on Woodstown. Kevin Minnick, does Glassboro just have too much firepower for Woodstown in this rematch, or does Woodstown have to be able to slow down that explosive attack? How do they do that if that's their game plan?
Yeah, Dan, this is another, like you said, it's a rematch, but not only is it a rematch of division, rivals from this season, but these two teams met in this same game last year, and Glassboro came away with a 14-10 win en route to, its berth in the state final. Glassboro has just been phenomenal basically all season long. I mean, a couple of hiccups here and there where the scores were kind of tight and you wondered maybe what would happen, but in the playoffs, they've just been phenomenal. And, they played each other in the final regular season finale. And that was a game that Glassboro won at home 20-7. That was the game that Woodstown's running back, Bryce Belinfante, hurt his ankle. I don't know if Bryce, if he had 100% in that game, they come back and win it. But, Glassboro pretty much had control of that game, just didn't find the end zone as often as they have recently. So the big thing in this game is, from the Woodstown perspective is Bryce Belinfante at 100%? I don't know that he is, but last week in the sectional final, he went for 225 yards, scored only needed to score one touchdown. They beat Shore 31-0 in obviously a decisive win. Belinfante carried the ball 25 times in that game. He's going to have to carry the ball 25 times against Glassboro if Woodstown's to stay in it. Woodstown has not been a team that's been highly productive when they put the ball in the air. They lost their starting quarterback, Jack Holliday, to Haddon Heights earlier in the season, hasn't been back since. And they've kind of been limited in what they can do putting the ball in the air. So, they're going to have to run the ball. They're going to have to chew up clock and keep Glassboro's high-powered offense off the field, which no one really has been able to do this year. Glassboro comes into the game with, a quarterback. They've kind of gone back and forth between Chris Foster and Jack O'Connell, both thrown over to 1,000 yards, both with 14 touchdowns apiece. So in the passing game, Glassboro is extremely effective. They got the Saab brothers with Amari Saab and Xavier Saab, who have combined for close to 80 catches, 21 touchdowns, and almost 1,700 yards, through the air. So, does Woodstown have the DBs to be able to slow those two kids down? And even if they did, they have got other kids like Makai Parker, a talented freshman who scored 4 touchdowns. And, and that doesn't even begin to talk about what Glassboro's capable of doing if they keep the ball on the ground. Kenny Smith has had a tremendous season since coming over from Hamilton. He missed, I believe it was the first 4 games, but since then has rushed for nearly 1,200 yards and 17 touchdowns. So, Glassboro comes in this game clearly as the favorite. I don't know if they're going to be a 3-touchdown favorite or Woodstown's going to find a way to keep it tight. But, Glassboro, obviously, like we've talked about all season long, the top Group 1 team in the state all season, winning a sectional title was obviously the first goal that they've accomplished. The ultimate goal is getting back to Rutgers and coming out of there with a W after that sour taste against Mountain Lakes last year. So it's state championship or bust for this team. They're on a roll. I don't think Woodstown has enough to slow them down. I just can't see Glassboro falling apart in this game. Stranger things have happened from time to time, but there's just way too much talent and way too much focus right now, on Glassboro's side that they have to come away with a W. But two teams that are very familiar with each other. There's going to be no surprises, so you're going to have to battle in the trenches. You're going to have to buckle down on defense, and we'll see what happens. But like I said, Glassboro is really on all cylinders right now.
Well, that was a comprehensive breakdown of all 14 state semifinal games all throughout New Jersey. That's going to be leading us up to a big weekend. And we're going to have a big weekend here on NJ.com as well with 4 different broadcasts. As I mentioned earlier, I will be calling the Holy Spirit at DePaul Catholic game on Friday night at 6 p.m. We'll also have broadcast teams at Somerville for the mainland at Somerville contest Friday at 7, in Ramsey for the St. Augustine Prep at Don Bosco Prep game in non-public A. And then on Saturday, we'll have a broadcast team covering St. John Vianney at Pope John in the non-public B semifinals. So we'll have all those games covered. If you're an NJ.com subscriber, you can watch the games live and on demand. We'll have you covered on NJ.com/watch. And a reminder, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the action. For in-depth coverage of all these games around New Jersey, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats, be sure to visit NJ.com/HSSports. So big thanks go out to my main men, Luis Torres, Ryan Patty, Mike Kinney, Kevin Minnick, Bill Evans, and Joe Zadalis. And we're all led by our exceptional leader in Brian Dekine to get us through the finish line here in this semifinal showdown, where we focus on everything that's leading up to that last round, the state championships. They're in the distance. Who's going to make it to MetLife and to Rutgers? We'll find out after this week. So that'll do it for another episode here of the Jersey Blitz. For all of our NJ.com beat writers, I'm Dan Long saying so long, and we'll see you next week here on the Blitz.